Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tool Studio. I'm here today to demonstrate how to make a ring with a spinning focal point using metal clay. For today's project, we're going to be creating a ring that has a spinning mechanism hidden behind a stone. So I thought I'd start off by showing the elements that are going to come together for the construction of this piece. I have a tube setting here that I've kind of inset into, I did a little star shape, but you could do whatever shape it is that you'd like to spin. And then behind the setting, there's a hole that I have made a post to match. So I've got my ring band here, and then on the back of my ring band, there's a little inset area that will fit this disc, and my post will go through. And then my tube setting with my spinning element will go on top of the post. And then once that's connected, you'll trim any excess and reset the stone. So it's a lot of little pieces that once you've made them come together pretty quickly to make a really satisfying, in my opinion, ring. Today I'm going to be working with Clay Tack. Clay Tack is an additive that you mix into your lump clay, and it just makes your clay extra sticky. So especially on products like we're working on today that have moving pieces, you really want your joints and connections to be secure, is a great addition to your toolbox. I'm also going to be working with a clay board, silicone ring mandrels, and today I'm using a 9. You want to work with a ring mandrel that is 3 sizes up from your desired finished ring. I have a snake maker, some 4mm white diamond CZs, a cup round clay shaper, a round needle file, an ultra clay pick, a brush for water, a tissue blade, and then just a brush for dusting off any sanded clay. I have a wonder roller, cool slip, and a soft frame. My soft frame's loaded up with a size 2 blade, but as long as it's not super thin, it doesn't really matter what size blade you have in here. I have a miter vise, clay thickness rolling frames, tough cards, and I'm working with EZ960 Sterling Clay. Today I'm using the North Star template, but you can use whatever shape it is that you'd like to make spin. I have precision hole punches, a 1.5mm drill bit. This is a 4mm setting burr, and I'm working with 4mm setting burr because I'm setting a 4mm stone. I have a drilling pin vise and the accompanying drills, mega mold, sanding pads, a sanding stick, and a dish for water. So this project is kind of comprised of a bunch of little elements that all end up coming together pretty quickly. But we're starting off with the first element is going to be the tube setting, and for that we're just making a chunky coil. And I've got thickness rolling frames here that I've stacked up to be 19 cards thick. And I'm using these as a guide for my snake maker so I can assure that my coil is going to be one even thickness. When you're coiling, you don't want to put cool slip or any non-stick agent on your snake maker or your work surface. So I'm just going right in and making a thick coil. So then I'm going to use this to cut a seat into to make that setting. So there's your first step. I'm going to take this off to the heat to dry. And then while we're coiling, we might as well go ahead and make our ring band. And for this project, I made a 5 cards thick ring band. And again, when you're making your rings, you want to make sure you're accounting for shrink when you fire your pieces. So select a ring mandrel that is going to be 3 sizes larger than your desired ring. And again, I'm using this to make sure my ring band is one even thickness all the way around. And I'm just applying downward pressure and scooting side to side to coil here. And I always end up kind of having to, sometimes it sticks a little bit or it flattens out some. And when it does that, you can either kind of pinch it to give it some places that are going to be higher to make it stick again. Or you can kind of just apply a little more pressure sometimes. But you don't want to go too fast on this process because then it'll just flatten it out and it won't be round. Keep working with that coil until you have one even 5 cards thick coil. So then I like to make my ring bands by just setting my mandrel upside down and wrapping around. I'll usually give myself a little bit of room because this clay shrinks as it dries. But in a project like this, I'm going to be opening up a seam on it anyways. So I'll just go ahead and wrap it a little more tightly. And I'm going to trim my excess with a tissue blade. Save that for another project. And then again, I'm not really worried about this connection because it's going to be cut open again as I'm adding the element for the spinning mechanism anyways, but I just want to make sure it's going to stay against my mandrel as it dries so it doesn't pop open and distort or anything. So just closing it with water, and this is also going to go off to dry. So moving right along, next we're going to make the shape that is going to go around the tube setting, and I'm working with the Northern Star template, but you could work with whatever shape you want. But for something like this that has really tiny interior and like it's a very small space that you're trying to get, if you were to cut that out with a clay pick, you'd end up losing a lot of your shape there. So I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently today, and I'm going to start off by rolling some clay to 8 cards thickness. And then I'm going to put some cool slip on there. I'm going to roll down to 6 cards thickness to emboss this shape, and then I'm going to cut away the excess from the outside edge. So I'm working with this smaller star, and that makes it especially difficult, but you could work with a larger one if you'd like, or again a different shape. But by cutting away from the outside, you just have more of your shape left instead of cutting on the inside of the template. So at this point, you can either use the clay pick like usual, and cut away, or on a shape like this that has a lot of just straight lines, you could also use a tissue blade. So it's up to you, but you just want to cut away to remove your extra clay. Once you've removed the excess clay, you need to cut a hole for your setting to be able to fit into. So the easiest way to do that and pick the cutter is to take your snake that you had made and hold it up against the ends here and see what is the closest fit. And for my 19 card thick coil for my 4mm stone, that is the pink precision hole punch. And it's a pretty tight fit, as you can see on this one where they're already connected. So I'm going to kind of do some setting down and checking. And I'm doing all of this on a tough card. That way I don't have to pick this up and potentially distort it when I move it to dry, because there are going to be some pretty thin connection points until I put my setting back in there to beef this piece up. So that looks good, and I've cut. And then on something like this, because it was such a tight fit, I'm almost worried about distorting it on the way out. And you can just take this whole piece off to dry, and then once it's a little bit dry, pop it out and let it dry the rest of the way. So the next element that we're going to make is a little post attached to a base. And for that, we're going to be working with 4 cards thickness. And I'm using 4 cards thickness because my drill bit that I'm going to be making the hole for this post to go into is just a little bit smaller than a dried 4 card thick coil. and it's the closest match I could find. So then once it's all dry, I'll just use my needle file to adjust the hole that this post goes into until it's a perfect fit. So again, using this as kind of a guide for making my coil. And then for this element, it's very important that it is straight. So when I take it off to dry, I'm going to make sure that I scoot it straight again, because just in moving that got a little wiggly. So I'm just going to use my rolling frame, that straight edge, to tap it straight. And then we're also going to use the 4 cards thickness frame to make that little circle that we're attaching that post to. And for that, I am using my pink precision hole punch again. And I'm just cutting out one little circle, and my post will attach to that. And then this element will get inserted into the back of the ring. So you just need one circle that size. So up next, we're going to be making the element that's going to attach to the ring band. It's basically just a circle, but then it has an inset circle on the inside to accommodate the space of the circle that we just made. So for that, I'm actually going to make a little space holder using the Mega Mold. And for the Mega Mold, it's just a molding compound that you mix together in a 1-to-1 ratio. So for something like this, you really don't need much, and I'm going to roll it out and cut enough for this project and some other sizes while I'm at it. And you're going to mix the 2 colors together until it is one even lighter blue. Once your Mega Mold is one even color, you're ready to make a sheet out of it to cut the discs that you're going to use as a placeholder there. And the most straightforward way to go about that is to take a 4 cards thickness rolling frame and then a snake maker and then pushing down. And that's going to give me 4 cards thickness, and I'm making it 4 cards thickness to match the thickness of the base circle here that this is acting as a placeholder for. So I'm going to actually allow this to set before I punch the holes, but I wanted to show you as far as picking the size goes. I used a pink precision hole punch for this, and I'm going to go ahead and size up to the mint precision hole punch for cutting the placeholder that's going to go in the back here when you're making it. And I'm doing that just because if you were to use the exact same size, you'd have to perfectly center everything, and this just gives you a little bit of wiggle room. So whatever size you use to punch the circle for this base, size up one when you go to cut the circle for your little blue placeholder. So once it's dry enough that you can kind of press at it with a fingernail and it bounces back, you're ready to start cutting. So I'm just using the precision hole punches to cut, and sometimes it doesn't even look like it cut all the way because it's such a thin cut line, but that cut. So got enough material here to make some for this project, and then just extras, another size for another project. So now we're ready to use that little blue element we just made to create this piece. And all it really is just some clay squished around this little space holder. And we're going to be squishing to 6 cards thickness. And for this, it's easier to just set some clay on your work surface and then place this on top. And if you try to roll it, the blue piece will kind of scoot across your clay instead of going down into it. So instead I'm taking my snake maker and just pushing straight down into my clay. So now I'm ready to cut the outside edge, and for that I'm just going up in size again with my precision hole punches to the maroon, and that gives me a pretty thin edge, so I'll kind of set, and that wasn't center at all. So then I'll scoot and try again, and that's looking better, and that's going to be perfect. So I'm going to reline up with that. Use my clay pick to scoot away my extra clay there. And now I have the element to attach to my ring with a seat already in it. Instead of trying to carve one out or cut one, I just made the seat already in the clay there. So I'm going to take this to dry before drilling a hole in it, and again, I'm going to be using the same drill bit that is coordinated to the post element. But for now, we're going to take this to dry. So I'm returning to the very first coil that I made, the 19 cards thick coil for a tube setting, and we're going to start shaping and then cutting the seat for our stone. So I have a miter jig here, and this is just an excellent tool for anytime you need to get a flat face on something round like this, because you can use this perfectly flat face as a edge to sand against. So I've got kind of, I have a rounded top to my coil here. So I'm just trying to scoot it until it looks like all of the round portion is above the level here. That way I'll be able to sand my top nice and flush. And it has these adjustable knobs at the top that you can use to loosen or tighten. And you just want to gently tighten down against your coil so it's not going to fall out like mine just did. And then I'm taking a medium sanding stick and just really quickly taking this top down to be nice and flat. And starting off with a nice flat top is just going to make sure we have a straight seat, and this setting is going to look very precise and clean. So then at this point, I'm going to scoot it out a little bit, so I'm loosening the top and then pushing forward. And you want to make it tall enough, and you can always cut it to, or sand it to be shorter, but you want to make sure that your setting is going to be tall enough to accommodate the element that you're going to be putting it into. So I'll kind of just usually take this and set it next to it and see how I think that looks. That looks a little tall. So I'm going to scoot it down. With this technique of sending the post through to make the spinning element, you want to make sure you don't make it so short that you don't have room to add the post, but really as tall or short as you want this setting to be. And again, it's tight, and now I'm coming in with my saw frame. And again, I've got this nice straight face, and I'm using that as a guide to rest my blade against. And when you're cutting metal clay with the saw frame, you really do not need to apply much pressure. It's just kind of back and forth, side to side. If you push too hard, you'll end up breaking your greenware and having a edge. And we're going to be doing some sanding anyway, so it's not the end of the world if you break your greenware. But it's just more sanding you'll have to do. All right. So then at this point, I'm going to take out the rest of this and save it for another project. And I'm going to load this guy in upside down so I can even up this top face. There's kind of a spot where I mentioned if you break your greenware, you'll have more cleanup to do. That last little bit snapped, so I'm just going to use my medium stick to clean this up and make it a nice even face. All right, so now we're ready to move on and cut our seat for our stone. And I've got my hand drill with one of the smaller drill bits, well, the largest in the set, but a smaller drill bit than my end desired drill bit, because you want to start off with a smaller drill bit and then work your way up. There's less risk of breaking your pieces that way. And I'm just starting off by making a hole in center, and I'll usually kind of poke and twist a little bit and kind of come directly over it and block all the camera views and see if that looks center. And if it does, then I'll go ahead and proceed to drill all the way through. And the stone, by the time we get the stone in this 19 card thick coil, there isn't a ton of wiggle room, so you do want to make sure you're close to center here, because you can always sand your outside edge and adjust things a little bit to make it the perfect fit, but you don't have too much of a wall allowance to do that with this setting. So now I'm going to follow up that smaller hole with a larger drill bit, and again I'm using 1.5 for this project because that coordinates to the size post that I had rolled in my clay. And on this I'm barely applying any pressure, it's just twisting it and kind of letting the bit fall in and apply a little pressure. I'm really not pushing down that hard. Again, dusting away my extra. And now I'm ready to cut my seat. So I have a 4mm setting burr here, and I'm working with that because I'm setting a 4mm stone. And you can put this in your pin vise if you'd like. I just usually will hold it in my hand. And I'm still keeping it in this vise because it helps me keep this nice and flat and keeps me from twisting it off to the side and going in crooked. And you're wanting to cut a seat that is deep enough that when you put your stone in, the girdle on your stone there, which is the widest part of the stone, needs to be under the clay. That way when it shrinks, it wraps around that high point and will lock and set your stone in place. Otherwise it'll just eject and pop your stone out as it shrinks. And I'm just going to keep twisting to remove material until my stone sits nicely, and I'll show you how that should look. So once the girdle of your stone is sitting below the level of your clay there, you're ready to start assembling the tube setting to whatever spinning element it is that you chose. And for my piece, I did the North Star, and it has some pretty thin points of connection there. So I'm not going to refine these edges until this material is in there and supporting this shape. So I'm going to start off by setting it down where it's stable and supported, and check to see how close of a fit this is. And we're almost there, but not quite, so I'm going to have to do just a little bit of sanding. So I have my round needle file here, and I'm sliding it into that interior piece there, and I've got my piece supported over here and here. I'm supporting it on both sides where I'm sanding. I'm not just holding it off to the side there, because that would increase the chance of breaking. And I'm just gonna do some very minor adjustments to get that tube to fit in this hole. Once you're done sanding and your piece fits together, you're ready to mix up some paste using the Clay Tack. And before you crack this open, you want to shake it well to mix everything up. And then I just have some lump EZ960 there that I'll usually just pick some up on a clay pick. And just get about a drop there. And then I like to use a clay shaper to press it in. It's actually looking a little dry, so I'm going to add a little more. But you can always add more. But if you make it a little bit too thin for your purposes, it's not helpful. So I always like to start with just a little and add as needed. And I'm not wanting a slip consistency. I don't want it to be that thin. I just want to mix up a paste. And that's looking pretty good. So again, this is just going to make sure that connection's super strong. So before I apply the paste to the pieces to be joined, I'm just going to take a damp brush and apply just a little bit of moisture to both of the elements that are going to be connected. And then I just pick up a little bit of paste on the clay shaper and put it on the bottom edge here. And then I'm going to place it and apply some downward pressure. And then come in with a brush and smooth out any material that got squished out over top there. And then also you can use a brush to pick up and add. There's a little gap there. And then I'll usually just take plain water to smooth out any kind of inconsistencies or high areas of the paste. And then I'm going to want to allow this to dry completely before flipping it over, and if there's any low areas or anything that you need to fill in with paste on that side, you'll also want to do so. Moving right along, while I still have some paste here, I'm going to be making the little post to circle element. And since these edges are kind of goofy, I'm going to use the tissue blade and kind of roll to cut and make that nice and straight. And then this you can always trim later once it's attached, and it's kind of easier to apply it when there's a little extra material to hold on to. So then I'm just going to take this and really quickly dip in water and then dip into the paste. Try to scoop some up. There we go. And then I'm going to take it back to this pad and I'm going to press down, and I'm going to apply pressure for 20 seconds. And then at that point, I'm going to grab my damp brush again and clean up the extra that kind of smushed out on the side there. And with this, you want to make sure you don't leave too much paste up and around your post, because otherwise it'll prevent this piece from fitting snugly into the back of our ring band. You can always do some sanding once it's dry, but I think it's a little bit easier to just smooth it out with a brush first. So I'm also going to take this off to dry. Up next, we're going to be connecting this element to the ring band. So I still have my extra strength paste there, and I'm going to pop out my little placeholder. I'll usually just grab my clay pick and boink. And then it's easier to drill a hole in this when you can set it on something flat and it's not connected to your ring. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and drill out and then I take it over to my ring, and I already have the one side cut there, and I'll just kind of hold it in place and see where about I need to cut the other side. And then with this, you could come back in either with your saw frame, or for a band that's this thin, you can also use a tissue blade and kind of support it on the ring mandrel and do some back and forth kind of wiggling. So whichever you'd prefer for that. And then I'm gonna scoop up my paste and put it on those ends. And I'm kind of generous with this because you want enough material to be able to kind of shape it and transition the band a little bit from this coil to the disc. So this is important when you go to put this piece in. You want to make sure that the open area where you're going to be concealing that spinning connection is facing down. So I kind of try to eyeball it for center there. And then I'm just going to use my damp brush to scoot this material and blend out that connection point. Pick a little bit more up with my brush for this side. And now this element is also ready to dry. While that element is drying, I'm ready to do some refining work on this one. And I'm just starting off with super fine sanding pads, and I'll use scissors to cut off some of the back there. And that just helps it get into smaller points like that. Because this piece is so narrow and fragile, I'm again making sure that I'm holding and supporting my piece while I'm sanding. And I'm just trying to use the super fine to clean up kind of bumpiness to my cut edge and smooth things out. And then I'm going to work my way down to ultra fine and micro fine until I have a nice clean surface on my edges here. At this point, we're almost ready to assemble. It would be difficult to address these areas with sanding after putting this on top. So I'm just going to spend a quick moment with ultrafine and microfine, smoothing out the surface there really fast. And then I'm also going to really quickly put it on my mandrel to support it and make sure this top face is nice and smooth. And now we're ready to put it all together. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking this post, this circle, and I've got my ring upside down, and I'm inserting it there, and then I'm going to put it back on my mandrel to keep that circle from backing out when I'm applying pressure to put the star onto it. And then at this point I'll put it in and kind of check the height to make sure it's not too crazy tall. And it's a little tall, but once that's connected, what I'm going to do is I'll come back in with my seat cutting burr, and we'll use my stone setting burr to cut that seat again. So that'll be fine. And my Clay Tack paste there has gotten kind of dried out, but I'm just going to use a little bit of water to soften it up again. And then, since I want to make sure I'm not getting any of the paste on this element, because I don't want to connect this post to this ring at all, what I usually do is I will take the paste and I'll put it very, very high up on this top element. That way when I slide the spinning star on top of it, it'll kind of take it down with it. So I'm going to set that down really quick, take some water, and use my brush to put it in my star element there. And when you do that, you want to make sure you don't get so much water on it that this base is going to be wet and adhere to the back plate. It's just a teeny bit of water. And I'm sliding it on. So again, at this point, I don't want to push any paste out and under, so I'm not applying a ton of pressure. I'm just kind of setting it on top there. And then I'm going to pick up some more paste and set it in here and use my brush to push down and around to really securely join this post to this tube setting element. And again, don't be too stressed if you're getting some paste up on the seat, because we'll recut that so your stone will still fit perfectly. I'm just trying to scoot the paste until that's filled. And then I'm going to smooth with water. And I'm not even going to rotate this, tempt it, touch it. I'm going to take this off until it's completely dry. Now that this is dry, I'm ready to bring back my stone setting burr and re-establish my seat there. And again, I'm doing this on the mandrel still. That way there's pressure being applied to the post and everything all the way up. And just like before, it's kind of a game of twist and check. I'm also stabilizing my star top element here just to make sure I'm not kind of applying pressure crookedly. I'm gonna snap anything at any point. Let's see how we fit. So I always kind of bring it up to eye level to check from the side. And that's a little tall yet, so I'm gonna keep cutting my seat until once again that girdle is below the level of my metal clay. And for this project, there is not an azure behind my stone, so that's going to restrict the amount of light that's coming through. I found that working with kiln safe CZs, they don't really lose too much of a sparkle at this size, but I wouldn't want to go up to a larger size stone. And since there's not an azure, I would not recommend a nano gem for this project. So a kiln safe CZ 4mm or smaller is best for this type of setting. Alright, so that looks like it's going to be good. So at this point I'm going to pop it out, and then I just dampen the seat with a little bit of water, and that keeps my stone in place while I'm doing my final refinements. Make sure it's sitting nicely in the seat there and it's not crooked. And then at this point, any sort of sanding or refining that you'd want to do, like I can see there's a little bit of kind of maybe slip still or paste from that connection there that I'm just going to take down really quick. Just super gentle. And I'm again doing all of this on the mandrel, so this ring is supported. And once you're happy with your piece, one last thing to do before you fire it is to make sure that the piece is not connected where it shouldn't be. So I'm just going to give it a quick spin. Super gently at this point because it is greenware and greenware is kind of fragile, but I have those strength drops in my connections making sure they're secure. So I'm able to test it out. And that's going to be good to go. So I'm going to finish up with a little bit more refinement and then you're ready to fire. Like any piece that has a set stone, as a last step before you fire, you want to make sure you clean your stone with some alcohol. I'm working with the EZ960, so I'm going to be supporting this piece with aluminum hydrate. For a piece like this, I like to just set it on its side and I kind of scoot to make a little spot for the bigger element there. And I'm laying it flat, and then I'll come and just kind of tuck it in. When you're working with alumina hydrate, you do want to make sure that you are wearing a mask. Since I'm using EZ960, I'm going to fire this piece to 1675 with a 2-hour hold. Once your piece is fired, you have a couple of options available to you for finishing it. You can either hand polish it, or you can put it in a tumbler. I would not recommend any kind of flex shaft or radial finishing, as that's just going to make your piece spin and you'll end up kind of having a hard time finishing it evenly. This method of hiding a connection in a tube setting is a really clean and easy way to make a joint that can spin. And it could be used in not just rings, but also pendants or even decorative objects. I can't wait to see how you incorporate this technique into your practice and what you make with it. Thanks for watching.